My brothers and sisters, let me tell you about a death that happened without a single bullet being fired. In January 2026, Uganda held an election where people voted, ballots were counted, and a winner was announced. But democracy died that day, killed by the very people who were supposed to protect it. This is the story of how the internet went dark, votes were stolen, and the world finally said, enough is enough. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. And please like and subscribe for more videos like this. My brothers and sisters, let me tell you something that keeps me awake at night. There is a kind of death that comes not with bullets, but with ballots. It comes not with soldiers marching, but with citizens voting. It is the death of hope dressed in the clothes of democracy. And what happened in Uganda this January, what is still happening as I speak to you now, this is exactly that kind of death. My brothers and sisters, when the powerful can make you vote and still steal your voice, when they can count your ballot and still ignore your choice, then the election itself becomes the weapon. This is what our Ugandan brothers and sisters learned on January 15th, 2026. And the world, including the United Nations, is finally beginning to pay attention. Let me take you to Kampala. Let me show you what happened when democracy became a performance, when voting became theater, and when the international community finally said, enough is enough. 2 days before Ugandans were supposed to choose their leader, something strange happened. The internet died. Not by accident. Not because of technical problems. No, my brothers and sisters, this was by design. The Uganda Communications Commission just switched it off. Social media vanished. WhatsApp went silent. Facebook disappeared. They told people it was to stop false information, to keep peace and order. But you and I, we know better, do we not? When a government fears the internet more than it respects the people, something is very wrong. Because in modern times, the internet is not just for entertainment. It is the eyes of the people. It is how citizens watch their government. It is how journalists report the truth. It is how ordinary people can say, I saw this wrong thing at my polling station. I witnessed this fraud. I recorded this intimidation. When you take away the internet before an election, you are not protecting anyone. You are hiding something. The silence that fell over Uganda was not peaceful. It was the silence of a prison. Voters could not check information. They could not share what they saw at polling centers. Journalists struggled to send their reports. Election observers, both local and international, they lost one of their most important tools. And in that darkness, anything could happen. Anything could happen. President Yoweri Museveni, the man who has ruled Uganda since 1986, 40 years, my brothers and sisters, 40 years of one man, he was declared the winner with 71 to 72% of the vote. Overwhelming, they said. Decisive, they claimed. But the leading opposition candidate, Bobi Wine, he did not accept this result. He called it what it was, a lie, a fake result enforced by fear. And you know what happened next? The streets filled with people, not to celebrate, but to protest. And the government's answer? Tear gas, gunfire, arrests. This is how they responded to citizens asking for their voices to be heard. Security forces surrounded Bobi Wine's house while votes were still being counted. His family, they said, was placed under house arrest. The police denied formally arresting him, but they admitted heavy security presence. My brothers and sisters, when armed men surround your home and you cannot leave, what is that if not arrest? They just do not want to call it by its name. But here is where the story changes. Here is where the world began to wake up. The United States government issued a formal warning. They spoke about voter intimidation, about restricted media, about violent crackdowns, about lack of transparency. The U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Embassy in Kampala told American citizens to be careful because of rising tensions. When Washington speaks this clearly, my brothers and sisters, it means something serious is happening. Then the United Nations entered the picture. The UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights did not just express concern. They warned about arbitrary detentions, about forced disappearances, about violent attacks on peaceful people. They said these actions violated fundamental rights and cast serious doubt on the legitimacy of the entire electoral process. The UN was not being diplomatic anymore. They were being direct, and then something remarkable happened. UN leaders started coming to Uganda, not just sending statements from New York or Geneva. They came in person. Because what was unfolding in Uganda was not just another disputed election in Africa. It was a test case. It was a question for the whole world. If elections can be held without freedom, without transparency, without trust, what do they truly represent anymore? Let me tell you what the days before this election looked like. Opposition rallies were not just disrupted, they were attacked. Supporters reported being dispersed with tear gas, with pepper spray, with batons. There were roadblocks that delayed or prevented gatherings. Opposition organizers were detained without clear charges. The electoral environment was shaped long before voting day arrived. This is the truth they do not want you to see. Civil society organizations, the groups that monitor elections and document abuses, they were ordered to stop their operations. Chapter 4, Uganda. The Human Rights Network for Journalists, Uganda, organizations with years of experience watching elections. They were silenced at the most critical moment. Authorities said it was for national security. But my brothers and sisters, when you silence the watchdogs right before an election, you are not protecting security. You are protecting fraud. When the provisional results were announced, Uganda crossed a line. What had been tension became confrontation. Citizens poured into the streets in several cities, not to celebrate, but to reject what they believed was a predetermined outcome. The response was swift and brutal. Tear gas against crowds, reports of gunfire, mounting arrests. The government said they were restoring order. But the images and testimonies from the ground told a different story. This was a state using force to silence dissent rather than address its cause. The lack of reliable information made everything worse. With the internet still blocked, independent verification became almost impossible. Rumors spread where facts should have been. Fear filled the space where transparency was needed. For many Ugandans, this information blackout felt deliberate, designed to control the narrative at the most sensitive moment. International observers saw the pattern clearly. Amnesty International documented excessive force against peaceful demonstrators. They reported arbitrary arrests of suspected opposition supporters, movement restrictions, the use of military vehicles to obstruct political gatherings. This was not normal election security. This was intimidation. The UN's warnings grew stronger. They spoke of arbitrary detentions and enforced disappearances of activists. They described violent dispersals that had become defining features of the electoral environment. These actions, the UN said clearly, not only violated fundamental rights, but actively undermined the legitimacy of the democratic process. When the United Nations uses language this strong, my brothers and sisters, the world is watching. For the United States, Uganda presents a difficult problem. President Museveni has been a regional partner for decades. Uganda contributes troops to peacekeeping missions in Somalia, fighting extremist groups. The country has been a key ally in counter-terrorism cooperation. This strategic importance has often protected Uganda from full international pressure, even as governance problems grew. But the 2026 election pushed that patience too far. When the U.S. State Department publicly warned about voter intimidation, restricted media, and violent repression, it reflected a deeper tension in American foreign policy. How do you promote democratic values without destabilizing security partnerships you consider essential? This question is not unique to Uganda. It appears in many places where U.S. interests in stability and counterterrorism intersect with governments accused of democratic backsliding. The question becomes unavoidable. Should stability be preserved at the expense of accountability? For American policymakers, the answer is complicated. Uganda's role in regional security has often shielded it from consequences, but sustained restrictions on civil liberties, on electoral fairness, on press freedom, these things complicate the relationship. When democratic norms erode, partnerships risk becoming transactional, maintained through necessity rather than shared values. Europe has faced similar calculations. Past elections in Uganda drew criticism from the European Union over irregularities and media suppression, but concrete consequences remained limited. African civil society groups have noticed this pattern. They argue that democratic principles are applied selectively, enforced strongly in some places, ignored quietly in others. My brothers and sisters, let me tell you what makes Uganda's situation even more serious. The country sits at the heart of East Africa. Political instability there does not stay contained within borders. Disputed elections and public unrest risk creating cross-border tensions, refugee flows, security vacuums, particularly in neighboring states already struggling with fragility. Regional stability depends partly on Uganda remaining stable. But what kind of stability are we talking about? Stability built on repression is not real stability. It is pressure building under the surface. There is also the generational factor we must understand. Uganda's population is overwhelmingly young. A significant majority is under 30 years old. For this generation, repeated elections perceived as closed or manipulated erode confidence not only in leaders, but in the democratic process itself. When young citizens lose faith in peaceful political change, frustration manifests as protest, as disengagement, or as rejection of institutional politics altogether. These are outcomes no international partner can easily manage. Over the years, constitutional changes in Uganda have removed presidential term limits and age limits. This allowed President Museveni to remain in power for nearly 4 decades. While these amendments were enacted through legal procedures, critics argue they hollowed out democratic accountability by eliminating meaningful competition. Elections continued, yes, but choice diminished. The forms of democracy remained while the substance disappeared. Freedom House, in its 2025 report, described Uganda's electoral credibility as declining. The organization noted that, while elections occur regularly, they lack genuine competitiveness, institutional independence, and equal conditions for all participants. This assessment matters because it comes from an independent organization with no political agenda in Uganda. They simply observe and report what they see. The political consequences of this environment extend beyond opposition parties. When citizens lose faith in electoral fairness, participation declines or transforms into confrontation. The boundary between law enforcement and political control grows increasingly blurred. Institutions perceived as partisan lose public trust. Security forces tasked with maintaining order become politicized. The result is fragile equilibrium maintained not by consensus, but by containment. For journalists in Uganda, the pressure has been mounting. Reports describe intimidation, restricted movement, obstacles to covering both polling and post-election protests. In some cases, reporters could not access key locations or communicate freely with their editors. When media cannot operate without fear, public accountability weakens. Rumor fills the gap left by verified information. The public loses the ability to know what is really happening in their own country. My brothers and sisters, democracy does not collapse overnight. It erodes gradually through laws rewritten, voices silenced, norms bent until accountability becomes optional. Uganda's 2036 election revealed this sobering reality. The question now is not only who governs Uganda, but how long a system built on restricted participation can sustain stability without consent. For the United States, the stakes are both moral and strategic. If democratic advocacy is perceived as rhetorical rather than principled, America's credibility suffers not just in Uganda but across the global South. Yet if security partnerships are abandoned without viable alternatives, regional instability may worsen. This is the dilemma facing Western powers. The arrival of UN leaders in Uganda signals that the international community recognizes this is a critical moment. These are not just courtesy visits. They are fact-finding missions. They are pressure missions. They are attempts to understand whether Uganda's government will respond to international concern or dismiss it as external interference. The Ugandan government has dismissed criticism as exactly that, external interference. But for many citizens who experienced the internet shutdown, who saw tear gas deployed against peaceful protesters, who witnessed security forces surrounding opposition leaders' homes, these criticisms confirm what they already knew. The international statements did not tell them anything new. They simply validated their lived experience. When the dust settles on this disputed election, one truth becomes difficult to ignore. This was never just about who won. It was about what was lost along the way. Elections are meant to be moments of renewal, times when citizens reaffirm trust in their institutions and belief in their collective future. But when elections are conducted amid fear, silence, and force, they leave behind something far more dangerous than political disagreement. They leave behind doubt. Doubt in the process. Doubt in leadership. Doubt in whether the promise of democracy still holds meaning. Uganda now stands at that crossroads. The warnings from the United States and the United Nations were not merely reactions to one contested result. They were signals that democratic erosion, once normalized, becomes increasingly difficult to reverse. History shows us that this pattern rarely ends quietly. Countries where citizens lose faith in peaceful political change often experience rising unrest, deeper polarization, or long periods of stagnation. Young populations respond not with patience, but with pressure. And when political systems fail to absorb that pressure, it seeks other outlets, sometimes constructive, often destructive. For Uganda, the coming years will test whether stability can truly endure without consent. For East Africa, the implications are wider. Precedents matter. When flawed elections are tolerated or explained away, they shape expectations across borders. They redefine what is considered acceptable governance. They slowly lower the bar for democratic practice in an entire region. For the international community, especially the United States and the United Nations, the challenge is profound. Democracy cannot be defended selectively without losing credibility. Security partnerships cannot remain sustainable if they are built on political systems that increasingly rely on repression. The balance between principle and pragmatism is difficult, but avoiding the question carries its own cost. My brothers and sisters, I speak to you as someone who believes deeply in the sovereignty of African nations, in our right to determine our own futures without external dictation. But I also believe in the voice of the people. And when that voice is silenced by internet blackouts, when it is suppressed by tear gas, when it is ignored despite being cast in a ballot box, then sovereignty means nothing. It becomes just another word for oppression. What happened in Uganda is a warning for all of Africa. It shows us how democracy can be performed without being practiced. It shows us how elections can be held without being free. It shows us how results can be announced without being trusted. And it shows us that the international community, when pushed far enough, will respond. The question before us now is what comes next. Will Uganda's government listen to the warnings from Washington and the United Nations? Will they address the concerns about transparency, about media freedom, about the treatment of opposition voices? Or will they dismiss these concerns and continue on the same path? And for those of us across Africa who still believe in real democracy, not the performance of it, but the substance of it, what is our responsibility? Do we stand with our Ugandan brothers and sisters demanding accountability? Do we speak out even when it is uncomfortable? Or do we stay silent and watch as the standards for democratic governance continue to decline across our continent? My brothers and sisters, elections alone do not guarantee freedom. We have seen this proven again in Uganda. The voting happened, the ballots were counted, the results were announced, but freedom was absent, transparency was absent, trust was absent. And without these things, what remains is not democracy. It is simply the machinery of power renewing itself. So I ask you, if you believe these questions matter beyond headlines and borders, share this message. Let people know what happened in Uganda. Let them understand that when democracy is threatened anywhere, it is threatened everywhere. And let us remember that truth, transparency, and accountability are worth defending no matter where they are challenged. Our Ugandan brothers and sisters deserve better. Africa deserves better. And democracy, real democracy, demands better from all of us.